So, Roger Morehouse, Buffs in Brief. This is where we look at a historical event very briefly, just long enough for you to do the washing up or walk your dog for like a very quick walk. 10 minutes, no more, on
Or
a
a
fascinating
gym
topic.
visit. I mean, one of my gym visits is, so.
Don't come lifting with me. I'll put you to shame. Anyway, this brief is based on one of the most important events of 20th century history. Roger Morehouse, it is the Reichstag Fire.
It is the Reichstag Fire, which was on the 27th of February, 1933, that particular night, just after 9 o'clock. So let's set the scene. Hitler's come to power, as you know, in 30th of January. The German political system is kind of, completely sclerotic by this point, largely because of the economic crisis that's a knock-on effect from the Wall Street crash. So a couple of, governments have come and gone, and then they try, right, okay, we'll try this guy. So they appoint him as
Roger, just to be clear, there's this sort of simplification, isn't there?
Yeah.
That Hitler was swept to power on an electoral victory, and then it's been a kind
it's
of
not
theme.
true.
But it's more a sort of oligarchical stitch up, isn't it, really? Like, he gets a fair amount of the popular vote, but that oligarchical stitch up means that he's still beholden to establishment figures. He's still kind of constitutionally beholden at this point. Is that
Yeah, exactly. So there are power bases that he kind of needs to keep sweet, basically, at this point. And he's at the head of a coalition government. So only a month in. I mean, his intention really throughout this period is to free himself of those constraints. And one of his requirements initially, or one of his first decisions, was to call an election, because he thought, he could free himself of his coalition partners. He could get that majority that he needed to basically say, well, I'm the rightfully elected leader of the government, and so on. So he does that right at the outset, and then the election is called for the 5th of March. So this is about a week before the election. And the Reichstag building, which is still there, still stands in Berlin. It's been a bit remodeled over the years and so on, is, of course, the site of the German parliament. So, really important political symbol. And on the night of the 27th of February, about 9 p.m., a student who was walking down that road, it's a big square outside the front of the Reichstag, if anyone knows it, a student there, his name was Hans Flöter, and he heard the sound of broken glass as he was walking along, and he ran, thought this is not a good sign. So he ran to find a policeman and starts the ball rolling. 20 minutes later, the fire brigade arrive, by which time the building is already on fire from the inside out. So the main plenary chamber, which is full of sort of heavy drapes and very plush leather and horsehair benches and that sort of thing, is already on fire. The flames are already licking up to the glass ceiling and so on. So it's already, pretty well alight.
That horsehair is going to be quite flammable, right?
Well, you'd think, it's been there for a while. It's probably a bit rancid already. And the first sort of policeman on scene, they actually discover a guy with his top off, who's running around using his own clothes effectively as kindling to set the fires, and supposedly he was caught red-handed. And when he was caught, his first words were "protest, protest, protest," like he was protesting. He'd been injured in an industrial accident, had been a lifelong communist, had come to Germany essentially to try and join what he saw as, the coming communist revolt against the Nazis. The Nazis have been in power, as I said, coalition government for a month. So he had tried, they subsequently discovered that he had tried to start fires elsewhere in sort of prominent buildings in Berlin. And he finally succeeded, broke into the Reichstag, broke that window that Hans Flöter heard, broke into the Reichstag and managed to start fires, which burnt out the main plenary chamber. Hitler arrives. That they're all told that they have to rush down to the Reichstag that evening, which they do. So Hitler arrives. Goering is already there. Goering is the Minister of Interior for the state of Prussia, so he's ultimately responsible for the police response. He's already on scene. Hitler arrives. Hitler is already, the idea has already been planted in his mind that this is the work of the communists. and he's raging. He's saying, this is a communist uprising. These people must be crushed. There's already the narrative has already taken root.
But this is a sincere reaction, we think, because
It
obviously there's
is.
going to be conspiracy theories. There's going to be
So the big thing around this is the conspiracy theories that sort of that grow around it, and the main conspiracy theory here is that the Nazis themselves kind of put van der Lubbe up to start the fire. There's very little doubt that van der Lubbe actually did it, but the question is, was there anyone behind him? Was anyone forcing him to do it? Did anyone go in there with him at gunpoint and say, right, start the fire? So that's the main conspiracy theory, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So already the same night, right, Hitler is sort of fulminating against this communist threat. Him and Goebbels. I'd start that again. Him and Goebbels start drafting what becomes known the following day as the Reichstag Fire decree, which suspends most civil liberties in Germany. That is then enshrined later in March. That's enshrined in law under the so-called Enabling Act, which is one of the absolutely key building blocks of Hitler's dictatorship, right? So this is suspending normal democratic process. All the sort of normal civil rights are suspended in perpetuity. So really, really important legal framework that grows out of the response to this, right? Because they portray it as a communist, part of a communist insurrection. The communists themselves are outlawed. So, the same night, communist journalists, communist activists, communist MPs even are arrested. Very soon they start setting up the concentration camps because they've got to put those people somewhere. So that whole terror apparatus grows out of this as well. So it's really, really central moment in that whole development, right? Now, the question is, as I said, this conspiracy theory, did the Nazis basically put the guy up to it? The evidence for that is sadly rather lacking, it must be said. The evidence is basically a kind of a gut feeling that the Nazi response was so quick and so thorough and so effective, so brutally effective in crushing the German left, particularly the communists, and arrogating all that power to themselves in the aftermath. So that the response was so brilliantly managed that the assumption is very often you sort of read that backwards and say, well, they must have masterminded it themselves. And I think that's the impulse, from where that conspiracy theory comes. Sadly, there isn't really much in the way of evidence. There was talk of a sort of a tunnel, to the Reichstag from, Goering's, one of Goering's offices as minister president of the state of Prussia, which is one of the nearby buildings. There's often talk that a couple of SA men would have basically press ganged van der Lubbe into doing what he did, but there's no proof and there's no names attached to that conspiracy theory. So it's kind of a gut feeling. What I think is more persuasive is that, in a sense, what the Reichstag Fire did for the Nazis was it gave them a wonderful excuse to do the thing that they already wanted to do.
So those kind of German conservatives who were in an uneasy alliance with Hitler, the kind of establishment oligarchical types who'd sort of smoothed his path to power. How did they react? Did they see it also as a useful cleansing out of the left-wing elements? Did they believe that it was a plot? Yeah. I mean, it's one thing the Nazis insisting to everybody that it's a communist plot, but who actually believed them?
Yeah, they were quite convincing, and it looked convincing. This guy was a self-confessed communist. He'd been caught red-handed. So it did look convincing that this was meant to be the spark for a communist uprising. The conservative oligarchs and, crucially, the president, Hindenburg, who still held, he was losing his marbles at that point. He was, increasingly senile. But it was enough to convince him, to permit Hitler basically to rule by decree, which he did, and then passed the Enabling Act. So they were sufficiently convinced that they went along with it, yes.
So without the fire, do we think Hitler would have found a way to do what he did anyway? Or was the fire a necessary catalyst to absolute power?
I think there would have been probably some other excuse found down the line. It might have been less convincing. It might have been more of a struggle to get, the moderates or the comparative moderates on side with your agenda. It suited. But this is why the conspiracy, comes to the fore. The conspiracy theory comes to the fore, is because it suited Hitler's purposes so perfectly that von der Lubbe would try and do that and would be interrupted doing so, and it would be seen as the spark for a communist uprising. So I think it speeded up, the Reichstag fire speeded up the whole process by which the Nazis consolidated their power.
So any good books to recommend for people?
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, just for the
dive?
sake of clarity, I will give one either side of the sort of conspiracy. So one that makes the case for the conspiracy is by a chap called Benjamin Carter Hett, who's quite well-known American historian. And he did a book called Burning the Reichstag, which makes this case for the conspiracy effectively. Very, very well written. I don't think we'll ever know for sure, but my gut feeling is, I always shy away from conspiracies anyway. But he makes the case. Some people will be convinced by that, so fair enough. The other book, which makes the contrary case, which is that this was a brilliant piece of improvisation, is by a German historian and journalist whose name is Sven Felix Kellerhoff, and his book is called The Reichstag Fire, and I think the subtitle is The Case Against Conspiracy. So he lays it out very clearly what his case is. And of the two, I mean, they're both very good, both very interesting, well-written books. In terms of the position, I'm more of a, how do we put this? I'm more of a Kellerhoffian than a Hettian. That's a bit of a mouthful. But I side against the conspiracy theory.
Brilliant stuff. Roger Moore House on this day, this week anyway, in
27th of Feb,
27th of Feb 1933. See you next time.